Our next speaker, Avrim Lazar, is the CEO of the Forest Products Association of Canada. And we first worked together when he was at Environment Canada, chairing a session at the Biodiversity Conference in Jakarta. He came to the Forest Products Association after years of doing work in public policy and environmental areas. But I tell you, the moment I decided to invite him to this conference, you can tell me later if you thought it was a good idea, my view is that we as Greens have to also prove to all of Canada that when we are government, it's nice to say when, you know, for a change, when we are government, that the industries of this country won't flee for pollution havens and ghettos elsewhere. They'll say, oh good, we've got some responsible, sensible people in government now, what a relief. So, I've been proud to work with the Forest Products Association on a bunch of different things when I was at Sierra Club, but as leader of the Green Party, I'm going to embarrass you, Avrim, I remember this, Camille and I, when Camille was my press secretary, we were sitting in the parliamentary hearings on the so-called Clean Air Act, which the Committee of Parliament was busy actually improving, so it really was a Clean Air Act. That's why it never came back for passage. But representing the Forest Products Association, Avrim Lazar presented views on the climate crisis and said, we're here as the Forest Products Association to endorse every single one of the amendments put forward by the coalition of environmental groups. And and the conservative chair of the committee kept saying, that's out of order. You weren't asked here to do that. You're out of order. You're out. Please stick to the topic. We don't want to hear you endorse the, you know. So that was how it went, and that's why Avrim's here. Avrim Lazar.
Thanks, Elizabeth. I've gotten two sorts of reactions to coming here tonight. One is from people who think it's, you know, the press think it's kind of a, this is going to spill, a man bites dog story. And those who think this doesn't make sense clearly just haven't been paying attention. Anyone who doesn't think the Green Party cares about jobs, anyone who doesn't think the Green Party cares about rural Canada, anyone who doesn't think the Green Party has good policies on the economy just hasn't been paying attention. At the same time, anyone who doesn't see that Canada's forest industry is going through a profound transformation also hasn't been paying attention. You know, political conventions are supposed to be partisan affairs. And what I'm going to share with you is not partisan. It's for all parties. Every single party should hear what I have to say. But it is political. Because politics is about making choices based on values. Politics is about knowing where you're at, seeing clear-eyed what's coming, reaching down to your values, and then taking choices. And that's what I want to talk to you about, and I want to talk to you about it from the perspective of street-level, small-town forest community. We live in interesting times. Economically, we've gone from a gradual recession into free fall. And we have to understand what that means for us. Some people think that we had a bubble, and this is a correction, and the world will go back to the way it was. And they're partly true. Growth will return, but it won't be the way it was. Others think that what we're experiencing is the impact of the gradual change in the geography of money, that the tectonic plates of the global economy have been moving, and this fissure, this crisis, is part of that. And that's also partly true. Others believe that this is Chicken Little's hour, that the economy as we know it is not coming back. And I suppose if you work in a Hummer parts factory, Chicken Little is a profit, but it's also only partly true. It's true the world will grow again. It's true it won't be the way it was before this. And it's also true some things that will not be again. Certainly in our industry, we know that growth in demand for lumber will return, but people aren't going to leave Craigslist and go back to the classifieds, and newsprint will not continue to grow. And certainly we know that some of the tendencies of globalization that seem inevitable will start to reverse as energy prices go up. But whatever you think about these economic times, the key is not to feel like a victim, but to make choices. It's also true we live in interesting environmental times. Almost any trajectory you look at takes you somewhere where you really don't want to go. And some people think that the solution to this is for everybody to behave better, to hope that humanity will come to its senses, become responsible, stop misbehaving around the commons, and do the right thing. And that's a very heroic assumption. Another way of thinking about it is that if we can integrate environmental values into global economic forces, we stand a reasonable chance at turning this thing around. And that's the thinking that I've seen in almost all of Elizabeth's speeches, in the thinking of the Green Party and the thinking of modern environmentalists. And that's a large part of the reason why I thought it would be a great thing to come. So let me share with you what it feels like in Forest Community Canada, down at street level, where your friends are losing jobs, you're under all sorts of pressures, and you're wondering what tomorrow will bring. Street level forest community, the main street intersection is at the intersection of two neighborhoods, Canada and the global economy. Canada is a great place. You have health care. You bump into your neighbor and they say sorry. We've got community, provincially owned forests everywhere except Atlantic Canada. And we've been brought up to believe, like a chicken in every pot, we can have a mill in every town, and that the jobs that come from natural resources are a birthright. And you wake up in the morning and you know you're in Canada as you have breakfast with your family and you leave your small town house and you walk to the mill, and all of a sudden you're in the global marketplace. Because we export most of what we make to the global marketplace. And in the global marketplace, not only do they not have health care, but they're going to trip you, steal your pacemaker, take your job, and not say sorry. What do we compete against in the global marketplace? We compete against Brazilian plantations. They clear-cut, grow monoculture eucalyptus. They bioengineer these trees so they grow quickly and have no branches at the bottom, and then they export into our markets. We compete against illegal logs from Russia and Indonesia. Almost 10% of the global supply of wood comes from illegal logging. We compete against places that have massive deforestation in which the trees are their lost leader. You cut down the forest and then you turn it into farmland, either for cattle or for soybeans to feed livestock, so all the meat eaters of this world can be satisfied and the forest will be destroyed. That is what we are competing against. And what are we doing? We are working in natural forests. We're not cutting them down and replacing them with farms or plantations. We are trying to find a way of being a model to the world of extracting trees and regrowing them in natural forests, respecting ecosystem values. And it's not always easy, and it's not always perfect. But we think that the way we do it in Canada is the right model, and the way that it's happening now in the global marketplace is the wrong one. The other thing about living in Main Street Forest Town in Canada is you're at the intersection of environment, social well-being, and economy. Not in a theoretical way, but in a way that gets you right in your gut. Go into a town in northern BC where the beetle has eaten your trees. Climate change has caused this plague, and here you sit, your house that you paid $120,000 for is worth $10,000. The mill is shut, there is no economic activity in the town. Your neighbors are all leaving, your parents don't know whether they should leave with you or the kids or stay there. The amount of disease goes up. The single biggest predictor of losing your health is losing your job. Social disruption happens, family violence goes up, drug abuse goes up, children acting out go up. From climate change to the beetle to the dead forest to social disintegration. That's Main Street intersection of the environment, social reality, and the economy. And we live it. So how do we cope with so many jobs being lost, so many pressures on us? Think of yourself as growing up in northern Ontario, northern BC, and you think that this was your birthright. A chicken in every pot, a lumber mill in every town. We have these resources, it's our right to use them. And all of a sudden you're trying to cope with monster plantations, environmental pressures from within, troubles in markets, and you got to decide what you're going to do. And that's where the essence of politics comes to you. Knowing where you're at, seeing what's happening, digging into your values and making choices. And what we've been doing is, first of all, looking at what's going to happen in the future. And one thing we know is that demand for forest products, for wood, pulp, and paper is actually going to grow. It's not going to decrease. The global GDP is predicted to double in the next 20 years. Now, whether you believe that or you think it's going to go up 80% or 112%, the bottom line is there's going to be huge demand for forest products. There will never be the same demand for newsprint and paper we have now, and the developing emerging economies will never go to the same per capita use, but they're going to want tissue, they're going to want books, they're going to want paper, they're going to want bookshelves, they're going to want frames for their houses, and every single projection for global demand shows it between 2 and 3% a year. So we know there'll be a market. But what about our competitors? What about Brazil? What about Russia? What about the Europeans and the Indonesians? Well, the good news is that they also have been hit by this crisis. If you want to grow trees in Brazil, you have to borrow a pile of money, buy huge tracts of land, take out the natural forests and plant the plantations and wait for the trees to grow. They are very highly leveraged, and this credit crisis has stopped their expansion. The Russians have huge geography, very little infrastructure, and the Russian oligarchs were also very highly leveraged, so they're in trouble as well. In addition, the Europeans have got huge problems of their cost structure, and so in the short term, we actually can see some light in terms of Canadians keeping jobs. But what about in the long term? And here it becomes quite a bit more interesting, because how did the Brazilians do it? It's pretty simple. They take good agricultural land or good forest land and use it for plantations. Well, there is no way that future economy will accept growing anything but food and biofuel on good agricultural land. The demand for biofuel to meet anybody's commitments for renewable energy is going to be huge. And there isn't enough insanity in the U.S. political system to feed that through corn. No matter how they twist and turn, it's not going to happen. The barriers to importing biofuels from Brazil, from sugarcane, are going to have to come down. And the Brazilians are going to start using that land for sugarcane for biofuel. More compelling is that we are running out of land for agriculture. If you look at any of the projections of demand for foodstuffs from the FAO, the agricultural productivity is going up very slowly and demand is going up very quickly. And the reason why this is becoming a huge land pressure is because the meat eaters take 10 times the land base as the vegetable eaters, and as people move from subsistence agriculture, the first thing they ask for when they enter the modern economy is a bit of pork, a bit of chicken, a bit of beef in their rice. And so the march of the subsistence farmer in Asia and South America, and God willing one day Africa, into the modern economy is resulting in a huge pressure on the land base. And through this, if through nothing else, we expect that the world will actually go back to thinking that we should derive our forest products from natural living forests rather than plantations. And so we think there is a future for Canadian forest industry, for Canadian forest towns, because good agricultural land will not be used for growing trees. It'll be used for growing food. The Russians, of course, have brilliant forests, but they also have gangsterism and corruption. And in the end, it's really hard to expand quickly when you don't have trust in your society. I was talking to a Russian colleague, and we were talking about certification, and he said, well, it's a lot cheaper to buy that than it is to buy an export permit. But you can get them all from the same guy. Places that have gangsterism, illegal logging, lack of social responsibility, their capacity to sell into global markets will be constrained. And we are convinced, strictly from an economic point of view, that scarcity in this world will be in natural resources. And that the word commodity won't be applied to lumber, pulp, or paper. It'll be applied to all the things that are infinitely replicable. Computers, fancy chips, all modern electronics. Those things are an unlimited supply. PhDs and brilliant engineers are an unlimited supply. It's land, water, and energy, it's nature, it's natural resources that will be the scarce resources. And Wilfrid Laurier was off by 100 years. If we learn to treasure and use intelligently our natural resources, the next century will belong to Canada because we have what is most scarce and most valuable. But that's only half of our advantage. The other half is that if you double global GDP, what's going to happen to the environment? Well, let's give ourselves credit for a 30% increase in eco-efficiency. I haven't seen it yet, but maybe it'll happen. Or a 40% increase in eco-efficiency. It's not enough. It's not near enough. And the most prized commodity, the most treasured commodity, and if you're thinking like a moneymaker, which is my job, the scarcity and therefore the bucks is going to be in goods with a top environmental credential. That's what the world's going to need. That's what it's going to treasure. That's what it's going to pay for. And so our economic strategy, our global strategy, our survival strategy in Canada's forest industry is and has to be not just to sell into markets where the Brazilians and the Russians are going to be shut out, but to sell the highest possible pedigreed from an environmental quality perspective, products into those markets. In a world in which and we're not starting from scratch. The last 10 years have been a miraculous transformation for us. In a world in which illegal logging is rampant, we still only have 7 illegal loggers left, 3 of which are on the South Shore and 4 on the coast of BC, all of which are supplementing their grow-ops with their illegal logging operations. But aside from those 7 guys with great ponytails, illegal logging is not a problem in Canada. And I visited one of the co-ops that uses illegal logging in BC, and frankly, I'd be happy if they can stay. In a world where deforestation is the single biggest contributor to greenhouse gases, Canada, because we have publicly owned forests, regenerates its forests by law. In a world in which the vast majority of operations, of logging operations, have no outside scrutiny, the vast majority of Canadian operations are subject to the scrutiny of certification systems. And we have more FSC in Canada than anywhere else in the world. CSA, I'm very, very proud of, and our Americans like their SFI, and we sell that into their markets. But our certification systems, compared to the rest of the world, creates very high standards. In a world in which is awash in incremental changes in energy efficiency, we've gone to 60% renewable energy and have an objective 100% renewable energy based on waste in our mills. In a world in which the consumer feels personal guilt about waste, we use every bit of the log. I think we're up to 98%. We have committed to taking every single scrap of waste paper that people will give us and using it in our recycling mills. And we've reduced what goes to landfill by 40% and are continuing to improve that enormously. In a world awash in greenwash on climate change, we haven't committed to hiding our emissions in a hole in the ground or to paying someone in Ecuador not to cut down their forest. We've committed to carbon neutrality with no purchased offsets, cradle to grave, from the forest to the landfill, so that we can look our customers of the future in the eye and say, yes, it has integrity as a carbon neutral product. We are far from perfect. We're better than most. And we are 100% committed to getting better and better and better every single year. Our ambition is the race to the top in environmental quality, largely because that's where our future jobs are, but also that's where our hearts are. And it's something that many of you may not understand about a lumberjack. You don't go in the forest industry because you want to get rich or because you like the bright lights. The average forester goes in it because he likes hanging out in the woods, and that's the job. And when you talk environmental quality, when you talk ecosystem integrity, when you talk preserving natural spaces, when you talk all those things to foresters, it's close to their heart. Of course they're not perfect, and of course our past practices needed fixing, and of course our current practices are going to continue to improve. But it's not just that we know climate change from the belly through the beetle. It's not just that we know the markets are green. It's that the culture of people who live and depend on the woods is not as hard to change as the culture of people who think about it from the cities. So we've chosen our path. We haven't decided not to retreat. We are going through the worst recession of the last 2 generations. Most of our best friends have been laid off. But we know markets are going to return. We know that our competitors will have their own disadvantages. And we are determined to have forest industry jobs in Canada based upon what the world needs, which is products of the highest environmental quality. And I don't want to pretend it's easy. You know, sometimes the environment and the economy goes easily together. Get off of fossil fuels, the suckers can't get your money. That makes sense. Provide certified products, you can sell them more easily. But we do have painful choices that we face every single day. When you live at street level of the environment, economy, and social, you're faced with critical caribou habitat and the worry about how do you look at the mayor in the eye or the union chief in the eye and say, we're going to slow down this mill to save critical habitat when there's hardly any jobs left. No one I've talked to knows an answer that doesn't wrench their guts. When I talk to the environmental community, and we work very closely with them on caribou habitat, there's no sort of, well, duh, close the mill. And when we talk to the mayors and the unions, they say, oh, I don't know if we can lose another 50 jobs in this town without the town shutting. So I don't want to pretend that it's all easy, that this integration of environment and economy doesn't have its hard bits. But overall, within that kind of accepting that that's part of the process of evolution, overall, there's no doubt that the only way we're going to get environmental progress is to build it into the economy, and the only way we're going to make any money is to do it within the realities of our planet, of nature, of environmental realities. So I said when I started that I got two types of reactions. I only gave you the one, which is like, why would you want to talk to those people? Or even, why would they want to talk to you? And I can tell you, I'm not sure which of us should be more insulted by that. But I did get another reaction. That's from my son, Ben. I also have tons of children. And Ben's reaction was, and I thought it was quite insightful, if you talk too long, it's going to be past your bedtime, Dad. Which is true. This is sort of getting past it for me. But I wanted to finish with a couple of lessons for policy that comes out of all this. Like, how can governments, because I'm not talking to you guys as campaigners or NGOs, I'm talking to you as a critical policy voice in Canadian political culture. So how should the thinking of policy be informed by this? Well, some of it's pretty obvious. If we only think about how much environment we can sacrifice for jobs, or only think about how many jobs we'll sacrifice from the environment, we just don't get the future. The future is integrated. There is no jobs without environment. So that's one. Another is that we've always thought that our future, our pride, will be in making fancy computers. And a slight embarrassment at being sort of an economic colony working in natural resources. Wrong. The most precious thing is natural resources, and governments, policies, have to have industrial strategies, economic strategies, to maximize the economic benefit from our natural resources, to maximize our capacity to get into global value change in a way that realizes that they are precious for the whole planet. Another thing we've learned from our experience at Main Street Forest Town is that incremental change sometimes doesn't get you there. Sometimes you got to do massive retooling. You know, we produce enough green energy in our mills to replace 3 nuclear reactors. And that's from waste. It's not cutting down trees to do it. That's massive retooling. And without that, we could have creeped energy efficiency by energy efficiency towards neutrality, but you never get there. And so another thing for governments to understand is that support for massive retooling is absolutely essential. 2 more. One is that there's a difference between policy and hockey. Apparently, the press hasn't caught on to this, and most political parties haven't caught on to this. But in hockey, the idea is to slam the other guy on the boards and win the game. In policy, winning is not the objective, it's solving the policy dilemma. Winning battles doesn't get you anywhere. The partisanship is a distraction from solving problems. I was quoted in the this is quite funny for me. I was quoted in Toronto Star. It's the first time they've covered a forestry story, I'll tell you, which I'm a little annoyed with them. And the quote was, the sort of fighting between economic and environmental interests is just covered dinosaur dandruff. I was going to say, when you see those kind of fights, you can smell the dinosaur dung not far away, but I thought for Toronto sensibilities, I'd be careful. We will make no progress pointing fingers, calling each other names, thinking that there are good people and bad people. I'm sure some of you, like me, wore Birkenstocks. They're made from cork. We eventually figure out they're a bad idea. Everybody has to learn to change. We all grow and change. Clogs, by the way, sequester lots of carbon. They're made out of wood. So this good guys and bad guys is fundamentally infantile. It's what children do. It's what fairy tales talk about. But problem solving isn't about winning. It isn't about name calling. It isn't about good people and bad people. It's about people of good faith recognizing where we are, what's coming, what our values are, and then making choices through discussion and information. And if you see yourselves, certainly I know you see Elizabeth, in all of those thoughts, be proud you have our respect. There's one last thing. When Elizabeth and I have known each other through all sorts of stuff. Some of the times I couldn't believe what she was saying, and sometimes when I hear her speak, I couldn't believe that I didn't understand that to begin with. We've gone back and forth, and sometimes we were immature, and sometimes we were brilliant. But over those many years, the last couple years, when we talk about our spiritual life. And if there's one thing I've learned, that if you don't lead from the heart, you're not leading at all. And for that, Elizabeth, thank you.